Welcome back to another episode of Initiated Survivor. We're doing a second episode of Ask a Psychologist Anything, where I'm going to answer questions that people have submitted to me about anything ranging from trauma recovery, survivors, allies, all kinds of stuff, anything that you want to know from a psychologist or therapist. If you have questions that you want answered, please feel free to DM me, email me directly, and I will answer them in the next time that we do and Ask a Psychologist Anything. Okay, so getting right to it. The first question, what is the best advice for dealing with PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder? This is obviously a very big question because this whole podcast series is all about so many different things to help us with trauma and trauma recovery. And in many ways, the work that I do as a clinical psychologist with my clients, with groups that I lead, with educational seminars that I lead, workshops, trainings, all of that is all about how we can help people deal with PTSD, how we can help people recover from PTSD. I think that what's really important is to look at the different stages of recovery that we identify and work with those different themes or different ideas. Those stages are establishing safety, remembrance and mourning, and integration and reconnection. Establishing safety is doing things to help yourself become physically safe. Living in a safe space, connecting with safe relationships, getting out of dangerous situations, making sure your basic needs are met, making sure also that space is comforting and conducive to recovery, as well as emotional safety, which is I'm using coping skills. I learned different coping skills and I have social support and people that are here that can help me if I become emotionally dysregulated. Remembrance and mourning is when we think of like the active stage of trauma recovery. This might be when you do therapy, when you do EMDR, when you do trauma recovery work. You might do art therapy, family therapy. You might do all kinds of different interventions, energy work, energy healing here. That is helping your body process and your brain process through the trauma in a way that helps you come back to the present moment as it is, so that there's no longer parts of your mind or your body stuck in the past trauma that has happened. And so that can be doing this active trauma recovery, doing different treatments, getting into group therapy or support groups that can all support helping you through this process of remembrance and mourning, with the idea that it's about recalling back what's happened, mourning and grieving the losses that were there, feeling all of the emotions that come up, and having safe space held for all of that. And that's where also the previous stage with all of those skills is going to be really key. Then we go into connection and integration. And this is where we connect back into our life, connect back into our relationships, and connect into our personal values, the things that are important to us and the things that we want to have back in our life. The idea behind this and why this is a key part of trauma recovery is that we want to have a life that is worth living, a life that was worth doing all this work for, worth surviving trauma for. And oftentimes the things that make our life worth living are things that create a sense of meaning and purpose. And those things are going to be aligned with our personal values, right? And our personal values can also inform long-term goals, short-term goals, things that we're working towards, things that we're building into our life, as well as the way that we approach life in general. And this can help us feel much more connected to who we are and to what is significant to us. And like life has something that we really want to be a part of. The thing that's also really important is that, and this is part of the integration piece, is that trauma recovery work starts to create a complete narrative or a complete picture of who we are and our life story, including that trauma and traumatic things happened and survival happened and recovery happened, injury happened, as well as pain and suffering, loss, as well as resilience, strength, and recovery. All of these things are a part of a larger narrative and a larger picture. And so the integration and reconnection is how do we take that picture, that story that we are a part of, and re-enter the world, enter into community, connect back in, connect with our values and our goals from a more complete and whole place. So for dealing with PTSD, I would think about that all three of those stages are different things that are going to be active at all times for us. And we may focus or prioritize one phase of that or one stage of that recovery at different times in our life. And so the best way with dealing with PTSD is to make sure that you are actively engaged in whatever stage you are in, nurturing that as well as being compassionate towards yourself and approaching yourself with radical generosity and compassion for yourself. So the next question, triggers. What are triggers? People talk about triggers all the time. People use the phrase like, I was triggered or this triggered me. And to a certain extent, it's kind of lost some of its meaning because people have been using that phrase, I was triggered or this triggered me, to mean I was emotionally activated. I had an emotion or I felt something in response to this. What we actually mean by trigger is that something happened that caused trauma symptoms to be expressed inside of a person and outside. So this can look like having flashbacks, which is where the body, the brain believes that it is back in the traumatic experience, in the dangerous experience, and is maybe seeing things or sensing things that are reflective of that traumatic experience and may feel very frightened. Triggers can also be activating an experience of dissociation, disconnecting from the self, the body, the world in response to an environmental stimuli, like smelling a certain smell, hearing certain sounds, having an intrusive memory of an experience or a traumatic experience, hearing a name. All of these things can cause a trigger to happen. When triggers happen, this is a very normal part of having trauma and PTSD. This is considered to be an active symptom of PTSD. So this isn't something that we would say continues to persist throughout somebody's lifespan. This is a part of having PTSD. And when you get treatment and recovery for PTSD, usually triggers significantly reduce, sometimes completely eliminate from your life, which is really wonderful. And again, there's a big difference between being triggered and just having an emotional reaction or response. Being angry or upset, being frustrated or being nervous and scared, not a trigger. Having trauma symptoms in response to an environmental experience, that's a trigger. So what do we do? How do we handle them? When triggers occur, the thing that can be the most effective shift to make is to move your thoughts and your focus away from, I'm trying to solve the problem of this trigger. I'm trying to analyze, is this situation safe? I'm trying to reassure myself that it's safe. I'm trying to remind myself everything's okay. Moving out of getting caught up in thoughts and rumination and moving towards, my body is having a response and I want to help my body with that response. I'm going to use physiologically soothing and comforting coping skills that help my body get out of that active fight or flight and into a more rested, safe, peaceful place. And so that can look like the tip skill from DBT or the mammalian dive reflex, where we put ice on our face to activate the parasympathetic nervous system. Doing deep breathing and breathing exercises is really good for this. Listening to calming music, using heavy weighted things, heavy pressure, deep pressure, like a weighted blanket, or they make these stuffed animals called warmies that are weighted stuffed animals and they're filled with lavender. It's amazing. Highly recommend. Doing any of these physiologically soothing things, like people are all about the cold plunges right now, that could help. Taking a cold shower, if a cold plunge is not accessible to you, taking a hot shower, taking a hot bath, things that are soothing and regulating. Going for a walk in a place that you feel comfortable in can also be really regulating around triggers. Doing things like keeping your eyes and your ears open so that you don't dissociate, doing grounding exercises so that you can come back from dissociation. All of that can be really helpful for the immediate moment. I think it's also good when you feel yourself get grounded and calm. When you're out of the exposure to that trigger, you're feeling better or okay, is to just make a note of that trigger. Just one, that it occurred, what you felt in your body. If you notice anything that had happened in the environment that may have activated things for you, to take note of that too. These can all be things that you then take to a therapist to help you with processing. Like when I do EMDR, triggers are actually something that we will deliberately process as a way of reducing somebody's symptom response in the face of triggers. So that's also something that we can do in regards to triggers is we can process them in therapy so that our body is not having that reaction anymore. Again, approach yourself with a tremendous amount of radical compassion that essentially a trigger is just an expression of the injury that occurred with trauma. It's kind of similar to like if, break your ankle and every now and then when you're hiking, your ankle gets really, really sore and hurts or swells and you have to stop and ice it for a little bit. Triggers are very similar with regards to trauma as that kind of injury. So I have a specific example that somebody offered here as they were asking this question about triggers. I changed some information in order to protect everybody's confidentiality and privacy. And so I paraphrased a considerable amount. But an example of triggers and something that can happen with triggers is that they also will come up around things that we don't think are necessarily activating or triggering. But this example, I'll read it really quickly. The example was, I wasn't triggered when seeing the person who essayed me on TV, but when I watched a YouTube video about someone else discussing her personal history experiencing abuse, I had an extreme reaction and froze up. I couldn't breathe, my chest hurt, and I stayed like that for hours. So those sensations this person is describing, freezing up, not breathing, chest hurting, this kind of sticking around for a long period of time, that is the body having a flashback. Even if there weren't visuals or images or memories coming up in that moment, the body was reacting with a freeze response. Holding the breath, having all this tightness, this is like the muscles gathering up energy and potentiation for being able to fight back or to lash out if needed. And there is this kind of freeze response that happens. So that's considered to be a flashback. It is very common that we will have triggers that we are not aware of, that we may see something that should be incredibly triggering to us and we don't actually feel that trigger, that activation, but then something else, like hearing somebody else's story, especially if it resonates with a certain part of ours that maybe we haven't processed or worked through yet. All of that kind of stuff is going to potentially create a trigger for us. In the face of this, when this happens, this is good to make note of, take to therapy as something that can be processed, as well as using skills around handling triggers to take care of yourself. Sometimes people ask, like, if there's a trigger that you weren't expecting, or if you get triggered about something like this, does this mean that something happened in your past that you are repressing in some way? Not necessarily. Our brain actually makes a lot of threads with creating memories, or I think of them as threads that connect different memories, different sensations, emotions, beliefs to our experiences. And so sometimes it can be that there's a certain smell that's reminiscent of what we were smelling at that time, or that maybe there's a certain sound or certain visual that is very similar to what was going on at that time. It doesn't mean that what we are witnessing or what we are looking at or experiencing in the moment of the trigger is an exact reflection of what happened to us. While our brain does dissociate from memories, essentially like block memories that are incredibly painful and traumatic, and that would be overwhelming to the brain to process, it's not common necessarily that we are going to have these kind of odd triggers and flashbacks as a way of that memory becoming revealed. But again, that doesn't necessarily mean that's not the case. You can still process these triggers with a therapist and get the healing and recovery you need from that, whether or not that thing happened in your past, from just the fact that the trigger happened, and can see actually this sense of safety, peace, and healing to occur while processing that trigger anyways. So the next question, also a big one, how do I start to date and have relationships again after SA or sexual assault? Sometimes we have to abbreviate for the socials. This can be really complicated for a lot of people, and it's very comprehensive and complex. And there's a lot to consider here. And I think the very first thing is to start with identifying what feels like the right next indicated step for you. We live in a culture that really pushes an agenda of connecting to romantic relationships, seeking partnerships, that our central relationships in our lives should be romantic and sexual partnerships, and that there's something wrong with us if that's not something that we're doing. And that's not actually true. And there isn't really significant history to that pattern except under certain cultural pressures around things like capitalism, colonization, white supremacy, monarchy, all of that kind of stuff that really reinforce this idea that we should be developing these nuclear families. So the first thing is to offer yourself a lot of freedom to be wherever you actually are in this process without any pressure that needs to change. The other thing is to think about also, where do you want to go? Like, what do you want in your life around relationships and dating, sexuality, romantic love, all of that kind of stuff? Where do you want things to go? Where are your values around this? Similar to how we talked about before with that question around how to deal with PTSD and this connection and integration, is that your values around relationships may have adjusted or changed or shifted in a way with regards to your relationships, how you want to conduct those. We learn and change and adapt based upon things that happen to us. And trauma is a huge thing that happens to us. And for most people that have experienced a traumatic incident, they've actually experienced multiple traumatic incidents and likely traumatic relationships, because about 85 to 90% of survivors say they knew the person who assaulted them. So there's relational trauma that is going to be activated with regards to trying to pursue dating and romantic and sexual relationships. So getting to this place where you really center where you are, generously holding yourself with gentleness and compassion in that space and allowing permission for you to be in that space as long as you want to, and that you're only going to go at the pace that feels right to yourself. Also identifying, what are your values and your goals around this? Are you wanting to date? And in what way? What relationships feel helpful and effective for you? In what ways can we incorporate more depth-based consent and consent culture in the way that you approach relationships? There's going to be episodes where I discuss consent on this podcast with some amazing guests, so I highly recommend listening to those. That consent isn't just about a yes or no, and it's not just about sex. It's about, what do I want? What would feel pleasing to me? What would feel really good? What would be fun? What am I open to experimenting with? How do I want relationships to look? What sensations, what kind of contact, what connection, what is it that I'm wanting? And how do I lean more into that and connect with people who are also wanting that and wanting to support and provide for that? And what are all the things that I really don't want? What experiences I don't want to have? What are some hard limits and hard lines around relationships? You don't have to know all of these answers in order to start dating, because that's also something we learn through dating. Set up some safety structures around yourself, ways that you can check in with yourself and gauge how you're feeling as you're going through the dating process, giving yourself space if you get overwhelmed or triggered, that you can back off and do things to stay safe. Definitely invite in a lot of social support with friends, with support groups, with therapists, with sponsors, whoever it is going to be really powerful in helping you in this process. Making sure, again, that nobody is imposing a pressure on you to do a certain thing with regards to relationships, but is really just holding space for you to have the experience that you're having. That can be really powerful. Bring this up with your therapist. Therapists love helping people reach their goals, and will definitely help you with this one too. Which brings us to the last question for the second installment of Ask a Psychologist Anything. How do you find a good therapist? All right. So finding a good therapist can definitely feel like a really overwhelming and daunting task for many people. And I think for many of my clients, they have told me that they have been searching for a therapist for months, sometimes years, and either not finding a good fit or just not finding anyone that's available. There's definitely this issue with regards to access, not having enough mental health care providers for all of the people that need mental health care, as well as major barriers to treatment around things like cost, insurance companies not having enough therapists on their panels, not paying therapists enough to be able to be on their panels, all of that kind of stuff. Finding a good therapist is talking about good fit. We all therapists talk about this. And what we mean by good fit is that this is a therapist that you feel that you can do the work that you're wanting to do with that person, that you feel that you can have the discussions you need to have, that you feel that this person is going to support you and offer what it is that you're looking for. So there are some people that they really like talk-based therapy where they talk about things. They have a therapist who listens, offers them some reflection and some feedback, but ultimately it's just holding space for them to process that. You're probably looking for a therapist that makes you feel listened to and that you believe is holding that space for you. Some people have a preference for a therapist who's going to offer concrete skills, help them work towards specific goals, do a lot of problem solving, notice and identify times when people are straying from their goals or interfering with their own goals, and help them work through those different problems. You're probably going to want a therapist that talks a lot about these things, has a lot of good training and evidence-based practices to be able to present to you coping skills and methods that we know work for helping people achieve certain goals. Oftentimes people like a blend of all of the things. They like to have some process, some talking. They like to have some problem solving and some skills. They also sometimes like to have moments of pause and meditation and having space being held for them as well. That these are all things that you can get from therapy that can be really helpful. It also can be really important with a good fit therapist to be mindful of the ways in which both of your sociopolitical and cultural backgrounds are connecting in that space. And this doesn't mean that you and your therapist have to have exact reflection in identities, but that you have a therapist that you know can hold space for your intersectional identities and they are mindful of their intersectional identities in a way that allows them to work with you through that, understanding that mental health needs, mental health issues, our symptoms, our diagnoses, our treatment and treatment plans, our skills, all of the things are happening in a context of culture and cultural pressures and systems of oppression. And therapists who are not mindful of systems of oppression and aren't willing or able to have those conversations with themselves, their colleagues, to learn more and build on that with their clients and support them in that are not going to be very effective because we can't eliminate that we all are swimming in this ocean and the ocean is salty and that salt is going to affect us. So that can also be something that you look for with finding a good therapist. Now, some key steps that you're going to want to take when you're looking for a therapist. If you're going with your insurance, get a referral list. And I would say cross-check that with something like Psychology Today, Mental Health Match, Therapy Den. These are all online networks that have profiles of therapists where you can get a little bit more specific information than what is on that referral list from your insurance. Therapists oftentimes are very specialized in what they do, but there isn't really space on the insurance referral list to indicate a specialty, or therapists indicate that they are specialized in all the things. And that's not very helpful. So go ahead and check out these different directories for specialties, as well as review their websites, get a sense for what it feels like to talk with them, all of that kind of stuff. That can be things through joining their mailing list, reading different blogs that they've written, if they post any videos or podcasts, say, listening to those, watching those kinds of things so that you can get a feel for what it's going to feel like to interact with this person. Also, most therapists will offer anywhere from 10 to 20 to 30 minute consultation where you can check in with them and see, is this a good fit? What does it feel like to talk to you about this? Or do you have a good idea of how to address my goals? And is this going to work moving forward? And any good therapist is going to be direct and clear with you if they do not feel that they are equipped to help you with what you need. And I know that can definitely be disappointing and discouraging to hear that, especially if you really resonated with the things that the therapist was saying on their website, on their profiles, to hear that. But believe me, if a therapist is telling you they're not a good fit for you, it is absolutely helping you get to the right person, because working with a not so great fit therapist oftentimes can just feel like the tires are spinning. They're not catching. We're not doing the work that we need, but we're spending all this time, energy, and money, and it's not working. And sometimes in the worst cases, having a bad fit therapist can actually create more problems. We definitely don't want to do that. So do all this cross-referencing, see if you can schedule a good fit call or a consultation with therapists. Interview many therapists. Don't just interview one, as much as you can. I know, again, we have this access issue, but if you can, interview quite a few and get a feel for it so that you feel like you have choices and options and who feels like the best fit out of that. Understand also that having a good fit doesn't mean it's a perfect fit. There's still going to be conflict. There's going to be times when you don't feel very heard by your therapist, or your therapist maybe misunderstands something, or maybe says something that doesn't work for you, or really is hurtful, or was offensive to you. And that is absolutely okay. Please bring that up with your therapist. We definitely want to hear that. Good therapists are not going to react defensively or get mad or upset that you bring this up. They're going to engage that process with you, not just because therapists want to make sure that you're getting therapy that works for you, and we want to modify it to make sure that it is helping you and working for you. We also want to repair any ruptures that happen in our relationship with our clients. This is a real relationship. And so that means that there are times when we might do something that damages that relationship, or that creates a rupture or an impasse. And we want to work to repair that with our clients. And that can be also in and of itself such a powerful healing thing to experience with a therapist, is having a rupture get repaired and see that happen. So definitely bring those things up as well. So for finding a good therapist, again, like, you're going to want to review all of the different profiles, review your referral list. You can also talk to people that you trust, like your friends, coworkers, colleagues. You can also talk to your friends' therapists about people that they might refer you to. I've had many of my clients ask for referrals for their friends. I'm happy to give those out, especially if I have any information about what they're looking for. I know a lot of my colleagues very well and the kind of work that they do, and can give you lots of great recommendations for that as well. All right. So if you ever have any questions that you want to ask a psychologist, therapist about any of these things, please feel free to submit those. I'm excited to check back in with you all very soon.